Welcome, everyone. I am Bob Wurzelbacher, the director of the Respect Life Office for the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, and this is our video podcast series that we call Being Pro-Life. Each month, we'll discuss a different topic from the Respect Life arena. We'll hear a personal story from someone deeply affected by that issue. And finally, we'll share ways that you can get involved. This month's topic is capital punishment. And as always, we have a special guest. Will you please introduce yourself?
Hi, Bob. It is so nice to be with you. My name is Reverend Dr. Crystal Walker. I am the Executive Director of Greater Dayton Christian Connections. Unfortunately, the mother of a son who was lost to gun violence.
Well, Crystal, thank you so much for being on the show today. We always love to hear people sharing their stories about their connection to the issue. Again, this month's issue topic is capital punishment. So you lost your son to gun violence. Why don't you take us back and tell us about that story?
I will. I'm going to take you back just a little bit further because I like to just kind of see where God interacts with everything. So in seminary, we were doing a case study on the death penalty, and I argued against the death penalty. And he says, that's only because you have not had anyone in your family or you're not personally affected by the death penalty would change your mind.
Wow.
I said, I really doubt that. And this was back in 2010, 2011, somewhere back then. So before I started going to seminary for my doctorate, I had a daughter lived in Florida, a son that lived in Indianapolis, and a son that lived in Dayton. And my daughter was coming up from Florida to visit all of us. And it was 15 days before my granddaughter was going to turn 2 years old, which was my son Eddie's daughter. So we all gathered over my dad's house. We had a really great time, took video, still have the video to this day of my son giving his daughter one of those little ride around electric cars. And those really great memories. On that Monday, my phone lays on the dresser that away from the bed, and I saw it was lit and continually lit. And I got calls from my son Frank and my dad and all sorts of people. And it was just call after call after call. And I thought something had happened to my dad. You know, the call started at midnight. And I called my son first, and he told me that his brother had been murdered. And my husband had already left for work. I called him back, and I was just in a state of unbelief at that point. I was like, I'm sure that this isn't true. I would have felt something. I would have known as a mother that, you know, part of me was gone.
Right.
So my husband came back, and we went and picked up my son and picked up my stepdaughter. And so we live in Indianapolis and rode to Dayton, Ohio, to the coroner's office. And he did tell me that my son was there, but I couldn't see him. They didn't have that kind of space to do that. He did ask me if I wanted to know how many times he had been shot. I didn't. And this was back in 2013, to this day, have not looked at the coroner's report. So that's kind of how I found out about my son's murder.
Wow, I cannot imagine. I am so sorry, Crystal. So you were getting several calls in the middle of the night, I guess, that you had missed, not being aware of what was going on exactly anyway. And you find out that your son, alive and well, at a party for his 2-year-old daughter not long ago, had been killed, had been murdered. What else do you know about that story of why or how that happened, or do you not know much of anything about that?
I know that it happened at a dice game. So they were playing, my son was playing illegal dice and gambling. That's mostly what I know about that story. I know that he was set up to be murdered. I know his house was broken into after the murder happened. And I know that the police know who did it, but he's not been arrested.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know if you want to get into that part or not.
No, since it's still an open case, I probably won't.
Okay. Can't talk about an open case. Well, the topic today is the death penalty, and there are certainly quite a number of people sitting on death row now with very unreliable witnesses being used in their conviction. We both know that to be the case. So this happened after this. You began your story with being in a class that talking against the death penalty and said, well, you would probably change your mind if you had a personal experience. Well, you had a very personal experience. at that moment or in those first few days, did you start to think differently? Why don't you take us
Absolutely
through that?
did. I was furious and vengeful.
Right,
And, I wanted this person dead who
right,
had taken the life of my son and the life of the father of a 2-year-old who was so very connected to her dad.
right,
He was her favorite person. So it took me a minute, and there was actually a retaliation killing. And I thought about the retaliation killing for a little bit, and it was a very short little bit because in the Dayton area, Sister Jeanette Bueller, I'm sure you may know her, but she's a sister of the Precious Blood. And she and a few people have a circle that goes to the victims' houses and has a prayer vigil there. And I've been involved in that prayer vigil. It went to either the death scene or the victim family member or the victim's house.
right.
And there was a prayer vigil that was held there. And so I thought about this for a few days, and this was a young man. My son was 28 when he was murdered, and this man was young as well. And I went to the prayer vigil, and some of the people said, I don't believe that you're here.
Prayer
Because
vigil for the person who was killed in vengeance,
Mhm,
who's not the killer, but is somehow involved, I guess, in your
correct.
son's death in some way. Okay. But yeah, so you went there.
I went there, I prayed, because I don't know that we want to get into this now, and I know you're editing, but I want to tell you this is kind of where my story continues to merge with my anti-death penalty stance, is because I know how empty I felt losing my child. I know that my daughter and my son still haven't recovered, completely yet.
Right,
And whether it's the person that's killed my son or not, I don't want another mother, another father, another brother, sister, daughter, son to go through the pain of losing someone because of murder. And death penalty to me is murder. It doesn't do a thing for me. It's not going to bring back my son.
right,
It's
right,
not going to do anything but make another family suffer.
right. So you were feeling in the beginning, you were feeling vengeance towards the whoever it was that killed your son. How much time passed between then deciding, I want to go to this prayer service?
It was just a matter of a couple of weeks.
Okay, so then was it before or when did the change happen that you realized as much as I am suffering, as much as my family is suffering, killing another person over this is just going to create more suffering? Was it that prayer service or
It was just right before. It was when I
right before?
decided to go.
It's so sad and tragic that you did live through this, like the seminary person was saying to you, you found out that you didn't change your mind about feeling like, it's still wrong to kill another person, that killing someone who kills does not cause healing, does not bring back your child and your son, does not bring your granddaughter's father back. So prior to having this experience yourself, was that the primary reason for you being against the death penalty? Or were there other reasons that were, I don't know, maybe that were more intellectual, right? That you had for being against the death penalty?
I was always against the death penalty from as far as I could think back. I remember when someone would get murdered, and of course, they showed it on TV, and I would sit and watch the TV coverage of it and pray that this wouldn't happen. And then when it did, it was just like so unbearably sad. So I never did like it. And then this was before I started doing prison ministry. So I would go talk to these ladies. You would sit there and you'd be in a circle with these ladies for the weekend. And they were just ladies, they were just people who had done something.
Right,
And if they told us what they did, they were still ladies who did something that I might find offensive, but they were still people.
right,
People with opportunities to change, to accept God, to do whatever, the same kind of people that I am. I mean, I'm not in prison for things that I've done. I might should be. there,
right,
might be some things, but we as a people tend to put these judgments on what we think are the higher sins
right.
rather than what we do every day. So It was talking to people and it's just really not wanting to see people killed. I just don't like that. And I know that a lot of people support the death penalty because of the heinous crimes that people commit, or, it still doesn't negate what God can do in that person's life.
Exactly. We share a faith in Christ. We share a faith in the mercy of God. If it weren't for God's mercy, I would certainly be in a very bad place. And so we all can extend that kind of forgiveness and mercy. And we're all on a journey towards being more like Christ. We're all on a journey for transformation because none of us are perfect and sinless. So we all share that faith and that belief that we should extend that same faith and mercy towards everyone, no matter what it is that they might have done. Of course, even on a more practical level, people assume that the death penalty is only for the worst of crimes. And we both know that it just is not applied like that in this country. It just isn't. One of the clear examples I have, someone who was on death row for being the getaway driver in a convenience store robbery that went bad. And everybody involved in that crime was tried separately. And the person who held the gun killed the convenience store clerk. That person is in prison, but is not on death row.
Right.
And the getaway driver is on death row. I mean, that right there. Most people don't think, even if you agree with the death penalty, which neither one of us do, but even if you agree with the death penalty, I don't think too many people think the getaway driver in a convenience store robbery, that is in the category of death penalty. But you just never know what the prosecutor is going to want to prosecute in a given county. So that's one example of how it is that it's applied so unevenly, not to mention those who even are innocent, right, have been exonerated, for crimes. If you're trying to speak to an audience that is like, there are situations where people just should be facing God right now for what it is that they do. They have no place in society. They obviously can't be redeemed. What's the first thing you might say to them who might be listening? Look, I think there are situations where it's okay to have the death penalty, but why should we abolish it here in Ohio?
First of all, I don't think that we have the right to tell anyone it's their time to see God or to be judged, because it clearly states in the Bible not to judge.
Right.
That doesn't say that we don't have a system where people are punished for things that they do. I agree that they should have that. My son's killer, who is known by the police, should be prosecuted at some point and spend time in jail. I don't know if it's the rest of his life, or that's not my call. I would give my statement and the judge and prosecutors know the extent of the crime. For those crimes that we consider totally heinous, I agree that life imprisonment should be a policy, but that gives that person the opportunity to be out of the community where they could harm someone else. And it gives them the opportunity to be able to grow in grace, because a lot of people do.
Right.
A lot of people that know that they're spending the rest of their life imprisoned have, nothing but opportunity to talk to God. I was tested after my son's murder, which was actually 2.5 blocks from the prison that I do the ministry in. So know that I have to pass by where he was murdered to go to the prison. I was tested by God in my beliefs because, like I said, I've been against the death penalty for a while. And I sat down at the table, and again, we don't know who's at the table, but there's 6 inmates, residents at the table, and 3 of them I know because they told me their story, because I'm clergy and sometimes they will confide in me. 3 of them had murdered someone. And God said, well, I'm just going to put you right here and let's just test this theory out that you have.
God loves to do that, doesn't he? So you want to tell more about that story then? So then what happened?
Yeah, so I talked to these women. I didn't know their stories until they told me on a one-on-one basis. But I had learned about them first and then their stories. So it's important to know the person and then figure out what contributing factors may or may not have led to this. And I got to know their story. The last surprise God had for me that weekend is there was a young lady, and we sit in the same seats. There's like one volunteer and two inmates, and another volunteer and two inmates, and another volunteer and two inmates. So there's always two that's sitting on your right and your left, kind of like the cross.
Right.
Sure, it's designed after that. So you get to kind of know the two people that are intimate with you right in your space, and then of course the whole table. Then on that Sunday, I told my story, and the girl that was sitting on my immediate left, she says, "Would you tell me your son's name?" And I told her. She says, "I know him." She says, he took me out of a really dark place. I know who he was. He was a really good person. I mean, God had an inmate that he sat at my table along with three other, people that had committed murder. So God was really working that weekend.
Talk about putting a human face on people who perhaps make really bad choices. In some cases, it's one really bad choice at a really difficult moment. Maybe in other cases, it's a series of several bad choices. But either way, my niece, her name is Tessie Castillo, she wrote a book called Crimson Letters. It tells the story in their own writing. There are four different men who are on death row in North Carolina. And, their life, their upbringing, their childhood, all leading up to when they got on death row. It's not family reading, but it's very interesting reading that just puts a human face. It doesn't mean this person shouldn't be in prison. Right. But it puts a human face. It kind of explains, I can see how this person had a life that wasn't the same as mine, that it had a life that led to choices that aren't as surprising, right? If I were to have made the same choice, like that saying, but by the grace of God, go I. I, at least, had an upbringing and a life that made it easy for me to make really good choices most of my life. Although I've had moments as well where I'm glad not all my life is on videotape, right? Anyway, but putting a human face or seeing where God is, even in people who have made some really bad choices in their lives, can possibly be really helpful for people who might just want to think, oh, well, if someone is on death row in particular, they are there because they don't deserve to live, right? They're there because they're not even human. And meeting people and talking with them, you can see that they are human and they have the same human dignity as all of us. People inside prison and outside prison have the same dignity. At least that's what we believe. So what is your personal involvement with working to end the death penalty?
Initially, I was asked to be involved with Miami Valley Ohioans to Stop Executions. And I've been working with them for some years. I'm getting old. I just don't remember all these dates.
You don't look it, but I believe you.
So I started with them, and we did the death vigils that I was talking about with Sister Jeanette. Then we started talking about what we could do in our area of involvement in the Dayton, Miami Valley area. And we started working on death penalty talks and why we should be opposed to the death penalty. And then there's always a march that happens in Dayton. It's the Good Friday Walk for Justice and Peace. And we always have the death penalty as one of the issues. And Professor Bob Stoughton is always the reader and writer of that station. So I've been involved with that for a while. Met Kevin Warner, who was the executive director of Ohioans to Stop Executions for a while. And in 2019, Jack Sullivan, who's the executive director of Ohio Council of Churches, Reverend Dr. Jack Sullivan, he was on the OTC board at the time, and he came to Dayton, Ohio to do a talk on something, right, that had to do with the death penalty and people's stories surrounding that. He lost his sister to murder. So he was telling his story, and some other people were telling their stories, and they asked for questions from the audience, and I gave a little bit of my story. And he's a Disciples of Christ minister as well as I am. And he says, well, we need to connect. He's one of those people that never call him. I'm just putting it out there. Don't call him if you don't want to do something, because you're going to get involved.
Don't call him unless you want to get involved, because he's very persuasive.
So I did call him, and he said, I need you to be on the Ohioans to Stop Executions board. I think you have a story. I think you'll be a good person to be involved in that. And I thought, okay, I can do that because I've been involved with the Miami Valley Board. He actually was stepping off of the board at that time, so he just kind of put me on there and he was gone. And then he actually got me involved in Journey of Hope, from violence to healing. And everybody on Journey of Hope is either someone who has someone on death row or an exoneree or a victim family member. So
Is that the Bill Pelkey
that is the Bill
organization, right?
Pelkey.
Yeah, I had Bill Pelkey on this show a couple of years ago. Well, if people wanted to hear that story real quick, since we referred to it, but people want to go back to the July 2019 episode on capital punishment. You can hear Bill Pelkey's incredible story as well of his connection with the death penalty in his grandmother's murder.
That's
Anyway, so go ahead.
So then I became involved in Journey of Hope, and I've been involved in that ever since.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit then, Crystal. So we are recording this in August for our listeners to know, but we're releasing this in October. So let's talk about October. So there's a campaign called No Death Penalty Ohio. If you go to the website, nodeathpenaltyoh.com, you can see a little bit about the official campaign to end Ohio's death penalty. Well, can you tell us a little bit about that, Crystal?
Absolutely. So in October, there's going to be lots of activities. There's going to be a week-long activity right around the middle of the month if you look at the upcoming events. And on the 17th will be a virtual lobby event. So the 12th, you can do training. And then if you go down a little bit, but there's going to be a virtual lobbying event, because right now there are two bills, and so House Bill 183 and Senate Bill 103 are both repeals for the death penalty. We really feel that there's going to be a very strong push to end the death penalty, because I believe right now it's about 57% of Ohioans oppose the death penalty, and this is a bipartisan effort. So I believe this is one of the first time that there's really a good push from both sides of the aisle to end the death penalty.
Right. Both Republicans and Democrats are pushing for these here in the Ohio legislature. Do you have any insight on when might this get voted on? How close are we to these bills going somewhere here in Ohio?
We believe it's going to be 2022 because the bills have been introduced. And of course, it has to go through a
Committees,
lot of la la la.
hearings, and right.
Yeah, we believe in 2022 that we will see an end to the death penalty in Ohio and join the 33 states that have already repealed the death penalty.
So this is a big deal. As I understand it, this is further along. These bills are further along and closer to being voted on and passed than we've had here in Ohio in some time. So, which is part of the reason, I suppose, why we're having this death penalty abolition week coming up here in Ohio, October 8th through 17th. Want to tell us a little bit about what we can do to get involved in Abolition Week, or talk through the toolkit or anything like that?
Absolutely. I believe if you just go on this website, there are so many things that you can do. You can find out who your legislators are, give them a call, write them a letter, sign up.
And you got Ohio Death Penalty Basics. If you want to get involved, you put in your volunteer information. You can request a speaker. You can write letters. I think there's a toolkit. If you can't see it, it's on the right side on this above link here. And then you scroll down, you can see all kinds of things you can read to educate yourself on it. A sample letter writing tool, things to print on social media, phone scripts if you want to call your local senator, printable postcards. You could get involved with your community or your church. You could have a letter writing campaign. You could do all kinds of things and get prepared to really contact our legislators and educate your communities on why it is that we should be ending the death penalty, and hope that we have a positive outcome in the vote whenever that vote takes place. All this is happening in the month of October. And of course, you don't have to stop after November is over either. Catholics know October to be Respect Life Month, where we think particularly about issues like abortion and euthanasia and capital punishment. But every month of the year, every week of the year, what do we say? 24/7, 365. You can always get involved on important issues like the death penalty. Anything else you want to say about your involvement in fighting the death penalty, or what little things people can do to get involved?
We just had a phone bank recently with the Miami Valley Ohioans to Stop Executions, and we called our senator at 7 p.m. at night. So you don't have to directly talk to them, but can you imagine coming into your office the next day and you've got 50, 60, 100 calls saying, we'd like to repeal the death penalty. I'm in your district. This is what I would like you to do as my representative. So definitely get involved in the calls. You don't have to talk to someone face to face. You can call them 6 in the morning, 9, 10 at night.
And leave a message on their
leave a
office phone,
message.
right? You know they won't answer.
Absolutely,
But
but
their light will be flashing and they'll have to listen to that message.
and then when you get the postcards that No Death Penalty Ohio gives out, please put a personal message in there because they'll have a message on there that they really want you to give to your representative. But if you put a personal message in there, it means just a little more. It might get read a little more.
Those are great points. That's great advice. Anything you wanted to say about your son? So tragically killed, but I'm sure you could say a lot about the beauty of his life.
Sure. My son, Eddie, he was not a perfect child, wasn't doing perfect things, obviously. Where he got killed was not the best situation, but he was so loved by so many. And I hear from his friends all the time, continually, who call me mom, and they're like, we really miss him. I think about him all the time. They still post on his Facebook page. They still post to me. And he was just the kind of person that would just give you the coat off of his back, literally. He took care of people, as the young girl attested to. In prison, he counseled people. He just didn't counsel himself, but he was a little hard-headed, but he was just a good, loving son, and I miss him terribly.
Well, Crystal, thank you so much for spending time with us on this show, talking about sharing your story of the loss of your son and the tragedy of violence in our communities, but the tragedy of the death penalty as well, coming from the perspective of someone who has lost a child to murder and still understanding it's just more tragedy to believe in the death penalty, on how it is that we should be able to move on beyond that and support the repeal of the death penalty here in Ohio, and how it is that people can get involved. As a reminder, it is nodeathpenaltyoh.com. That's where you can find the website. You can find out all kinds of ways that you can get involved, especially here in the month of October. But whatever month it is you're listening to this, you can still get involved. It does not matter what the month is. And hopefully we will soon see a day where we don't have the death penalty here in Ohio anymore. Thank you, Crystal, for spending time with us today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being offered to share my testimony and to hopefully have any of you just get involved in this.
And I want to thank all of our viewers and listeners for tuning in on this episode of our Being Pro-Life series. Head to the website to view all the links talked about on this episode at www.catholicaoc.org/beingprolife. Thank you again for joining us today. I look forward to being with you next time.